Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It is a joy to be back. Yes, had a couple of things happen, but I was at the DNC. We'll talk about that another day to see if the DNC's leadership really reflects where you are. But right now, let's talk about what just happened last night. By the time you hear this, it'll be a couple of nights ago, but it's an issue that continues to percolate. Um, President Trump said that basically it's time to own Gaza. America should take over Gaza, perhaps send in troops, level it further, and turn it to the Riviera, uh, I guess on the Mediterranean, build resorts. Now, interestingly, his son-in-law said that last year, and an Israeli real estate developer published those plans the year before. And just about 2.5 weeks before the October 7th attacks, at the UN General Assembly meeting, which is always held in the third week of September in New York City at the United Nations, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave the world a map in a room that was not full because people have been protesting them all over the world. Well, but he did protest a map. He did present a map of the new Middle East. There was no Gaza. There was no East Jerusalem. There was no West. Uh, I mean, my goodness, there was no West Bank. So there was no Palestine. So it seems to me, as we walk our way back, that the plans have been in place for some time for the more than 2 million Gazans to have been displaced. That's why I wanted to start there and go all the way back, because if you keep on going and going and going and going and going, when many people say, oh, look at what Trump has done, I'm like, honey, this has been going on for a minute and it's really complex. So always have to get people who are much smarter than I to help us to understand what we are looking at, because it's a whole lot, and it's got the whole world on fire. Dr. David Gibbs, brilliant historian from the University of Arizona, The Revolt of the Rich. I think you got some more books that you can. What did you say? I don't even know what to say. No one knows what to say. No one knows what to say because every day is something else. Attorney Mark Fancher, brilliant attorney, social critic, civil libertarian. Cannot wait to get your insights on this because you always give us such great historical and, I would say, spiritual perspective, which is so important. And a young man who's new to this panel, but very present and very much part of the family now, Corey Peterson Smith from the Institute for Policy Studies. He is the Michael Ratner Scholar for the Middle East there. And what about leveling Gaza when President Trump had this press conference with uh, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? Some people ask, well, why isn't he being arrested? Because he's actually been charged by the ICC, and technically he should be arrested when he sets foot on American soil. Okay, but that didn't happen. But it's what President Trump said. And how do you remove 2 million people from their homes? And people are saying, Palestinians are saying, I'm going home anyway. I'm going back home. I don't have a roof. I don't even have a foundation. I'm going home. You're not going to take my home from me. So, what do you think about this? What about the right of return? We saw this when 1.3 million Americans were moved during Hurricane Katrina. We argued for their right to return. David Gibbs. The fear for Black people in particular in New Orleans was that their political base was going to be blown apart beyond their cultural connection to the Gulf region. And something interesting happened. The Department of Labor relaxed their labor rules so that they could bring in migrant workers to rebuild the Gulf. They did not even let the people who were from the Gulf stay there and rebuild their region. They sent them to places, they scattered them to the four winds. And there you have it. So we kind of are expert at doing this. But Dr. David Gibbs, what's your take on this? I know you said before we came on the air, I just don't have words for this. Hey, Andre and Robert and Carol, what do you have to say, Bernadette? Mike, Kenneth, let me know, and everybody share, like and share on the Santita Jackson and Friends page on Facebook. Go to Blue Sky, santitajackson.bsky.social, and the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Please meet us over there, and at Santita J on X. Dr. David Gibbs, you got to come up with something.
I'll do my best. I obviously the proposal Trump made is on the one level preposterous in that it can't possibly work. And I'll get back to the preposterous in a moment, but it's also, even at the level of a verbal statement, it's pretty shocking. What he's proposing is the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and then redeveloping it as a real estate project. Obviously, Trump's specialty, that's what he thinks of. And naturally, he immediately would come to a real estate project, but after ethnically cleansing the people who live there and sending them to God knows where. And that's a very serious war crime in and of itself. I mean, that's in addition to, obviously, of course, the several 100,000 people who've been killed, the huge number of people who've had their homes destroyed, everything that's happened so far in this horrific war with American support and critical American support. It's not just Israel is doing it, but it's also the United States that is doing it in a certain sense, since we're making it all possible. So the U.S. is involved in this criminality. We're involved in it. We collectively are involved in it because it's taxpayer money up to our ears. And so the question is, what is Trump going to do about it? And what he has said is he's going to deepen it by producing a generalized ethnic cleansing of the entire population. The good news is, I can't think of any scenario where he actually will be able to do this. And let us be clear, Trump has often said bizarre things off the cuff, and then he's walked them back. He said repeatedly in the past he would settle the Ukraine war in 24 hours. So he comes into office, and lo and behold, after 24 hours, it's not settled. Surprise, surprise. And so he's walked back the idea. He said numerous things. There's a certain extraordinary amateurishness to everything he does, including on foreign policy, the most sensitive areas of foreign policy. And I'm assuming that's the case here. That doesn't make this comment at all innocent, even if it is something he walks back. But I think the good news is I can't imagine he's going to implement it, because the key factor is, where is he going to put the 2 million Palestinians who are there? No country, no Arab country, no Muslim country has stepped forward to take them, and no country would, in the right mind, want to take them under the circumstances in which they'd be expelled, because they would be complicit in ethnic cleansing, probably destabilize their own countries. It would disgrace the leader of whichever country takes them in. To the best of my knowledge, Egypt, Jordan, and Indonesia, people forget this. It's I believe, the largest Muslim country in the world. Mm-hmm. They've all refused to participate in this. And that's not surprising. They couldn't possibly do it. Trump has some leverage in theory over Jordan and Egypt because they all receive massive amounts of money, mostly as a payoff for recognizing Israel and settling their affairs with Israel. And if Trump were to withhold that money, which perhaps he'd be tempted to do, it might possibly unravel the peace agreement with Israel and further destabilize the region. So I doubt he would do that. In any case, even if he did that, I still doubt the leaders of Jordan or Egypt would agree to accept 2 million ethnically cleansed Palestinians. I would just be too destabilizing for their own country and too discrediting to their rule. So I just don't see this as something that could possibly be done. He talked about sending the United States to occupy it. Sending American troops into Gaza, really? That would get them killed. I can't imagine Trump would want that to happen, just in his own interest. I can't imagine he would want that to happen. I think what I'm assuming will happen, what I'm hoping will happen, is after Trump starts figuring all of these things out and people start pointing all these things out to him, he will realize it is not in his interest to pursue this any further, and he will drop it as he's dropped so many other crazy schemes he's come up with. I'm just thinking back to in his first message to Vladimir Putin after he was elected, a very important thing to do, considering we're effectively at war with Russia right now for all practical purposes. And he sent a message, a conciliatory message, sort of, which began by saying how much he appreciated the fact that Russia, then the Soviet Union, helped the United States win World War II, and they lost 60 million Russians in doing so. Well, nobody's ever said 60 million Russians. That's a completely wrong figure. And indicates to me this was just an off-the-cuff message that he didn't vet with anybody and didn't fact-check. And so I'm hoping that we have something very similar here, that this is some crazy statement he made in response to how he felt at the moment, and then he'll walk it back and explain it and just not implement it because he can't implement it. Now, I'm sure the Israelis are very pleased to hear it, just because implicit in all of this is ethnic cleansing. And Israel would love to ethnically cleanse Gaza. I'm sure that is very much on the agenda of Netanyahu. And Netanyahu could see this as a green light to ethnically cleanse. Now, of course, there's been a ceasefire that the United States has brokered up till now, which is a good thing, clearly. And if Trump was responsible for that, that's good.
But given this, will it hold?
That's the critical factor. Will it hold? Israel has had to withdraw from Gaza, and you've had Hamas, which evidently has been rebuilt and has not been destroyed at all, parading in Gaza and showing strength. And so I'm sure Netanyahu would love to go back to war in Gaza and ethnically cleanse the people of Gaza, expel them somewhere. That's what he wants. And so I'm sure what Trump has said, crazy as it may sound, is music to his ears. But again, the question is raised. Even if Netanyahu wants to do this, and he does, even if Trump would want to do this, and at least for the moment he said he wants to, we'll see, it can't be done in any way that I can see. And I think Trump does have a certain sense of his own self-interest, and the idea of destabilizing the Middle East and getting the U.S. mired in new wars and sending U.S. boots on the ground to get shot at, which would make him unpopular. I doubt he would want to do those things once he thinks it over. I doubt he would want to take responsibility for ethnically cleansing the country, which, again, he can't do anyway, even if he wants to. So I'm assuming that this is simply not going to happen, and he'll come up with some other way of handling it. The good news about Trump and the bad news about Trump is he's completely unpredictable. Just anecdotally, I have a friend who teaches Korean history, who's a specialist in Korea. Well, I haven't talked to him recently about this, but I heard him say during Trump's first term that Trump is completely unpredictable in Korea. On the one hand, he's much more likely to start a war with North Korea than any other president. On the other hand, he's much more likely to make peace with North Korea. He could do almost anything. And I'd like to think that that's true in the Middle East as well. And he's more likely to escalate the war and make it worse. And he's also more likely to maybe de-escalate it. Who knows? Even come up with a peace plan. That's optimistic. And maybe I shouldn't be optimistic. Maybe that's wishful thinking. But he is very unpredictable. And he does have a strong sense of his own political self-interest. And I'm hoping that will ultimately cause him to use the enormous leverage the United States has on Israel and basically demand Israel come up with a political settlement that involves a Palestinian state on Gaza and the West Bank, or the U.S. cuts off aid. The U.S. has that leverage if it wants to use it. There are enormous pressures pushing against that, including the Adelson family, which has been a major backer of Trump and their whole Republican Party, which has been steadfastly supportive of Netanyahu. On the other hand, there's no other solution than what I just said. And so I'm hoping eventually Trump will realize it is in his personal interest to consider this as an option. But that may be too optimistic. What we have now is a crazy, horrific, and ultimately unworkable proposal.
Corey Peterson Smith, Michael Ratner Scholar for Middle Eastern Studies at the Institute for Policy Studies. What do you make of this?
Well, I mean, this is, on one hand, obviously this is horrendous, what Trump is saying, talking about openly, forcibly displacing an entire group of people. And for people in the United States who are trying to make sense of this, I'm sorry to say that we have plenty of analogs in this country. I mean, on one hand, this is a kind of Palestinian story, but it's also an American story. Think about the Trail of Tears. Think about the many places that the people indigenous to this place have been forcibly displaced from, sold with the language that this will make it better. This is in many ways a kind of an old story. It's not to minimize how shocking, how bombastic, how outrageous it is, but there's a history here, and it's what you started with, Santita, at the top of this conversation. This has been the Israeli policy, removing Palestinians, and this has been the U.S. policy, is supporting the removal of Palestinians by force. So this is an escalation, it's an intensification of a policy, but it's a policy that's longstanding, I'm sorry to say, And just as people opposed the genocidal violence, of this last horrific chapter of the past year and a half in Gaza, we have to oppose this too. So that's my main take. I appreciate what Professor Gibbs is saying about how monumental what Trump is talking about is the idea of removing 2 million people from a piece of land. And it's so kind of beyond the pale, beyond the bounds of what officials talk about, even if their practice is very much in line. What they say has been different rhetorically. Because it's so beyond the pale, it's hard to imagine this going through. But I think that we should actually take it seriously, for a number of reasons. One is just by introducing this to the national and the international conversation, Trump is trying to normalize this kind of violence as somehow legitimate, that it's a legitimate option on the table to forcibly remove 2 million indigenous people. Whether they do that, or come up with a plan to do that right away or not, by saying it, he's trying to make that a kind of realistic possibility. And frankly, this is something that is also an old story in terms of Israeli colonization of Palestinian land. There's this thing that this policy that has existed for several decades, but especially in the 90s and early 2000s, Israel was massively expanding its settlements, its Jewish-only settlements in the West Bank. And they would talk about this idea of facts on the ground. They would say, we have to send more soldiers into the West Bank because we have more settlers there. And it's like, right, but you have more settlers there because you took the land. Right? They're trying to normalize this kind of violence in this place. We have to take that really seriously. The other thing is that one of the things that Trump does, part of the kind of Trump approach, is saying provocative, kind of maximalist things, and then negotiating something a bit short of that still moves the needle to a place that is unacceptable. So the notion that 2 million Palestinians would be displaced to Egypt and Jordan, which Egypt and Jordan have made it clear they're not interested in receiving more displaced Palestinians. You can imagine a situation where Trump says that, and that sounds outrageous. And he says, okay, but will you take 100,000 Palestinians? And that might seem the realistic option if we accept this. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. This is why we have to reject the entire thing. The other thing is that it's worth just kind of drilling down a little bit on the fault lines and the kind of relationships between Egypt and the United States and Jordan and the United States. Egypt, for example, Egypt and Jordan, first of all, it has to be said, are at the moment these quite stable countries, in a region where there's tremendous instability. Think about Jordan. Jordan is bordered by Syria, whose government just fell, and Iraq, which has been in a state of crisis since the U.S. invaded it more than 2 decades ago. And so these states, the Egyptian and Jordanian states, really want to hold on. They want to maintain their status as kind of stable regimes. But Egypt, for example, is in tremendous debt. They're doing all of this. They've pursued a number of economic policies and are building a new capital. Actually, they're building an entire city It's a new capital of their government, and getting into great debt doing that. So again, you can imagine Trump saying, what if you take X number of Palestinians and we give you this deal on IMF loans or whatever, right? I'm bringing up these scenarios to say that we should, as outrageous as this is, as shocking as it is, as offensive as it is, we need to take it very seriously and reject it very seriously. And I'll just end this comment by saying, you know, Trump, who is, by the way, returning to his real estate mogul roots. I mean, you know, again, thinking about analogs in this country, how did Donald Trump become Donald Trump? Before the reality TV stardom, before the Miss America pageantry, before WWE, he was a real estate guy who was pretty central to transforming New York City for the worse through displacing people and through making it more and more a city for the rich. And that is precisely the terms that he's talking in when he's talking about Gaza. Waterfront property, you know, the Mediterranean Riviera. He's talking like a real estate guy.
You know, a real estate guy who he's so key. I mean, when I saw the prime minister just smiling,
Yeah,
it was as if, I mean, and Trump was reading. That was not lost on me. He was reading. He was not off the cuff last night.
yeah.
And I thought that was interesting. And I said, what is going on here? Because it seems like this has been the Netanyahu endgame.
I mean, these are two men who are normalizing this kind of violence. And what I really
I mean,
hope
no, but I'm just saying, no matter what administration we have,
yes,
Netanyahu gets his way.
he's already gotten it.
Yeah, he did this with Clinton. I mean, he does this
And with Biden.
with the president after president after president. He does. I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, not at all, not at all. Let me. I'll just say this in conclusion, which is that despite the horrendous violence of decades, but especially the past year and a half, you know, what were the images out of Gaza last week and yesterday and today? They are images of hundreds of thousands of people returning home.
Oh, yeah.
Right? People who have taken such care to pack up their carpets and their pots and pans, everything that they can carry, they've held on to because they've said, one day or another, we're going home. And in all of this horror and all this rubble, Palestinians in Gaza see a future for themselves in Gaza. And I just think this is important because it's a rebuttal to when Trump says, oh, this place has to be cleared out, it's a demolition site.
And we'll own it.
And we'll own it. The people whose land it is don't see it that way.
Yeah.
We may look at it and rightly see absolute catastrophe. And no doubt Palestinians see that, but they also see a future for themselves. And as long as they see a future for themselves, we have to honor that. It's not Washington's choice to clear people out if they want to remain. And so as long as they want to remain, those of us who respect the rights of people need to affirm that and demand that, especially those of us who live in this country.
Attorney Mark Fancher.
I just want to say that I felt a tremendous sense of relief when he made that announcement. And to explain that, let me start by saying that I know in the aftermath of that, there are a number of people who have been pointing their fingers at uncommitteds and people who voted for third parties and saying, now look, this is the consequence of your not having supported the Democratic nominee, that you got something far worse than what you would have had. But what I think that is missed and what people must understand is that what he announced last night has always been the plan. That Netanyahu, after the attacks and with the commencement of the devastation of Gaza, it had been resolved that there needed to be a final solution, that all of those people needed to be wiped out. They needed to go, and they were going to bomb them into oblivion. They were going to kill every Palestinian that they could kill. And it's not just Netanyahu who was on board with that. Biden was on board with it.
Mhm.
And otherwise, he would not have been sending billions of dollars to support this,
Mhm.
knowing full well what the consequences and the results would be. It's not just that Biden was on board with it, Kamala Harris was on board with it. Everybody was on board with the idea of wiping out the population in Gaza. And the only difference between the Democratic Party and Donald Trump is that Donald Trump doesn't have a filter and he lacks discipline. And whereas the Democratic Party has been disciplined enough and savvy enough to cloak their ultimate plan with soothing rhetoric and empty rhetoric about a two-state solution and working out all kinds of arrangements and using diplomacy, while at the same time sending billions of dollars that they know are going to be used, sending actual bombs and weapons that they know are going to be used to kill thousands and thousands of people in Gaza. When they know this, then it helps us to understand exactly what's going on. And Donald Trump is not by instinct and not by nature an imperialist. He is an isolationist. He is someone who, in his own self-designed rhetoric, doesn't talk about starting wars or intervening in other countries or using the country's resources in other places. But what he also is he in addition to his many different psychoses, he has a serious inferiority complex. And when he is surrounded by people who he, on some level, thinks are smarter than he is, who are more aware than he is, who are more successful than he is, who are more powerful than he is, then he can't help himself. He tries to do and say things that he thinks would help him to be seen by them with a certain amount of favor. And so the imperialist agenda, the Zionist agenda, has always been to wipe out the population in Gaza, especially in recent years when they've discovered oil and other natural resources in that region, when they thought for a long time that it was just a barren desert area. And when they've recognized what he outlined in his statement about the potential for the tourist industry to come in and to transform it, this has been talked about for a while.
Mhm.
And so this has always been the plan. It's just that it's been a secret plan, not one that's been openly talked about. So when I say I was relieved because now everybody is aware. He has disclosed it in a way that people can't deny it. He has made it an existential threat, and it has sounded an alarm that now I think that people will heed. Whereas in the past, they have been, they've somehow been seduced into thinking that, well, if we had a different president, or if we had people who were reasonable, then we could work out a two-state solution, and we could preserve the lives of all of these people. That has never been an option. They are hell bent on genocide and forcible transfer, which are are crimes under international law. And they just have been very smooth and suave and clever about doing it. Trump doesn't lack the capacity to be smooth or clever. And so in that way, I said that, I think it's God's blessing that we have this man who is revealing all of the imperial secrets and making it possible for us to know those who were in Gaza, who are threatened with being displaced, now know that they've got to put their guard up, that they've got to be prepared for a defense. Those who are in solidarity with them now know that what they have to do is they have to mobilize and organize in order to prevent the genocide and the forced removal of an entire population and ethnic cleansing. The Arab countries who have been looked at as the potential destinations for these people now know that they need to gear up and prepare to defend against any kind of suggestions that they're going to be the destinations for a forcefully removed population. And the truth is that that's a new option that Trump possibly injected into the scenario, because I think that the original plan was just to kill them all, just kill them. There was no need for a place for them to go. They would all be dead. The only question is, where are you going to bury them? And so I think that we've been blessed to know, in all of its ugly, raw truth, what the plan has been, and we're in a better position now to interrupt it and to stop it.
Everybody, I want you to weigh in. Let us know what you think as we talk about this, because this is, I think that the quiet part is being said out loud, Corey. Peterson Smith from the Institute for Policy Studies. I think that you're right, Attorney Mark Fancher. I think, we have been blessed that it's all out here. As we said, Rush Darwish, Arab Americans Forward at the top. If you just went all the way back to 2.5 weeks before the October 7th attacks at the UN General Assembly, Prime Minister Netanyahu presented a new map of the Middle East, and Palestine wasn't on it. East Jerusalem, West Bank, Gaza, off the map, and expanded into these other into these other countries. That's how they've done this. And then you have this huge gas and oil discovery that was first reported. Well, it was reported widely in 2019. I said, here we go. Just as when I saw the oil and gas discoveries off the coast of Cuba, before we recognized them, I said, we're about to recognize them because they are now OPEC eligible. So and now you've got before Jared Kushner spoke at Harvard with his gentle voice, saying that, this is beautiful waterfront property. It could be developed into something wonderful. Before that, one of the top real estate developers who's known for displacing people and creating the settlements in the West Bank. He said, well, this can be a new Riviera. This can be something beautiful. What people don't know about that place, Rush Darwish, is that it was a Riviera before the Nakba.
Yeah, it was a beautiful place, but what made Gaza so beautiful wasn't just about waterfront property or this look like some sort of vacation resort. What makes Gaza beautiful are the people of Gaza, the resilience of an entire civilization that have no quit. And that's really the true story about Gaza. And ultimately, the greatest form of ethnic cleansing is when you talk about beachfront property, you talk about redeveloping. And at no point does Donald Trump or Netanyahu make any mention about, what do over 1.5 million people think about this? And that is the greatest form of colonialism. That is what we call ethnic cleansing at its finest. But here's what we have to look at. We've got to learn. And I have mixed reviews that are coming in from various leaders in the Arab American community, the Palestinian community, who will quickly dismiss Donald Trump and say, hey, this guy's a clown. He's insane. He's just throwing mud against a wall to get, to grab headlines. But we have to learn, because if somebody told me that after October 7th, even though I knew that there was going to be blood that's going to be administered by the Israeli occupying forces against the Palestinian civilization in Gaza, I would tell you, I would say maybe there'll be deaths. But if somebody told me that an entire year of missiles targeting civilians and homes and hospitals that would lead to the tune of over 50,000 Palestinians, and by the way, that's a soft number. We know that's a larger number with injuries and people that they have. We just don't have the resources to capture all the deaths.
No, wait a
I
minute.
I would say
Lancet said between in
it's
5 months ago, they said 186,000,
it,
186,000, and they projected 500,000 would be killed.
I mean, just recently, President Trump said, 1.5 million. He kept saying 1.5 million when there's 2 million Gazans, Palestinians who live there. So yes, that number, but we're going to go by at least for the sake of what the most publicized number is. So ultimately, we have to look at the past, which was very, very recent, in that you cannot dismiss and just think that Donald Trump is just this crazy guy, because I promise you, there's people that dismiss the idea that as bad as we know that Israel is towards the Palestinians, as bad as we know the occupation or the brutalization of Palestinians, I don't think even for me that I ever envisioned that children and women by the thousands would be targeted. I never envisioned that thousands and millions would be driven out of their home. And oh, by the way, where Israel would say, go north, you'll be safe, and then they will bomb refugee camps. Go south and you will be safe, and they will bomb those areas as well. So please do not dismiss the idea that with the support of the Trump administration and Benjamin Netanyahu will do whatever means necessary to remove 1.5 million people. All Netanyahu wants and needs is for the United States to support him, which all appears to be going that way, and to make sure nobody gets in his way. And we also have to learn that, yes, we do see resistance from the Egyptian government, the Jordanian government, and the Saudis have came out and said absolutely no way. But we all know that money changes people and changes governments. And that's something we have to look at as well. So this is a very, very scary time. And I wish there was an answer, but like Professor Mark said, we have got to mobilize and just keep fighting. But these are really, really tough times.
So, but where do you see things going right now? I mean, because you now are looking at students who are supporting justice for Palestinians who are facing deportation.
Yeah, I will say this, Santita. What you will see,
for example.
Yeah, what you will see now is, I will say this, is that the Trump administration are in for a major wake-up call. They just do not understand the infrastructure, the psychological infrastructure, that's right, of the Palestinians who live in Gaza. They do not understand the resilience. They do not understand their fight, their will. The Palestinians in Gaza, and not just Gaza and West Bank as well, they will sleep on top of their rubble. They do that. You could offer them, I'm not making this up here, Santita. You could offer a Palestinian right now in Gaza $10 million. We'll give you the best house. We'll give you the health care, but you have to leave home. And I am telling you, I'm not going to say 100%, but 9 out of 10 will say, you know what? I am good. I will just sleep on my rubble. Just if I could just get a blanket, please. And if I could have some water and a piece of bread so I could survive the rest of the day for me and my kids. And the Trump administration and the history of the United States, this is something that they just keep screwing up over and over. They went to Afghanistan and they thought that they could just will their way to do what they want, and they failed. Vietnam, Iraq, and now Gaza, is that it's almost impossible to defeat resiliency. And the Palestinians are on the top of the food chain. Oh, and by the way, our African-American brothers and sisters for 500 years with the resistance of taking on slavery. Again, if America and the founding fathers wanted it their way, I'm telling you right now, it's 2025. I am telling you, if it was up to them, there would be no AI, there would be no technology. They would just let slavery to keep going and everyone just to be slaves under their control if they had it their way. And that's why we're here, folks, is that we're saying, nope, that's not how it's going to be. We're going to have to fight. We're going to have to resist. And that is what it's going to take. We don't have the weapons. We don't have the money. But again, we also have resilience, and we're going to fight from the heart.
You have the will. I mean, because Mark Fancher, I mean, and Kuri, you jump in too. Because I mean, you see it whenever you see an oppressed people fight back against their oppressors with equal and opposing force. I mean, it's not just a physics law, Mark. I mean, when you look at what's happened with indigenous people, they have not gone anywhere. They've held on. When you look at Black people in America, we have not gone anywhere. We've held on. And I remember my brother, Jonathan, Congressman Jackson, said, you got to be very careful because as you continue to push people, you will create a person who's not afraid of you. And I think in Palestine, they're unafraid. And what did Chris Christopherson, may he rest in peace, he said, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Mark Fancher.
Yeah, and I think that many of the people who engage in empire building and conquest, uh, slavery, all of these kinds of things, they are so devoid. They have lost their humanity to the point where they can't even relate to the kinds of things that you just said. And they project onto these populations their own perspectives, their own viewpoints, their own ways of reacting. And so they think that if they can offer, something that in the way of material reward, or if they can intimidate, that these people will react in the same way that they would react if those same kinds of things came. And it's just not the same. When you have populations, when you have people who have a spiritual dimension to their lives, who understand that life is about more than material possessions, that it is about the relationships that you have with family and with community and ultimately with God, and that there are some things that are more important than material rewards. And when you have people who have dignity, who have pride, and who are committed to living life in a certain way, then you can't intimidate them. You can't buy them off. And it is what explains the durability of so many people, so many populations that have been the targets of this type of effort for so long. I mean, even and it's not just limited to people of color. I mean, you look at the Irish and
Oh,
the
yeah.
the,
And
the
Northern Ireland.
duration of their struggle.
Absolutely.
For and in fact, many of the things that were done in Africa in order to colonize and subjugate it, these were methods that were tried out on the Irish. You look at the indigenous populations in the Americas, and you don't see them in the streets. You don't see them, but they're in their own way. They continue to resist. They continue to endure, and they're not going anywhere. And certainly, Africa and its people who have been targeted by every oppressive force in the world. Very often, a population has to fight, one oppressive force. But Africa has been hit in, by everybody from all directions. Every European country practically has come in and tried to rip it off. And now other parts of the world have come in and tried to rip it off. They've depopulated it. They've taken huge segments of its population, its brightest, its youngest, its strongest, and taken them to far-flung parts of the world. And these people who were transported around the world by force, nevertheless, managed to continue to thrive, not just survive, but to thrive. And I think that that's what frightens oppressors more than anything. The fact that you can throw everything you got at an oppressed people, and then when you turn around, they're still standing up. They're still fighting back. And so certainly African people in the United States terrorize. They're people who are racists, white supremacists, they're terrified of Black people, because of the enduring and the constant, not only struggle to survive, but the fact that they continue to rise. And Palestinians terrify Zionists because they were supposed to have been wiped out a long time ago. They thought that they could go in 1948 and wipe out this population within a very brief period of time and then claim all of Palestine for themselves. But these people continue to fight back and resist. And that's not going to stop. So, I mean, because what are you going to do? You're gonna torture me? Okay. You're going to kill me? Okay, I'll just go home to God. But what are you going to do? I got nothing to lose. You've taken everything I've got in the way of material things. You've killed some of the closest members of my family.
Oh, yes.
What else do I got? Nothing to lose. I'm going to stand here and I'm going to fight you to my last breath. And you got a whole lot of people just like that. So these people aren't going anywhere. And the thing that gives me great inspiration and great hope is that the awareness of their situation is something that is now widely known in a way that it never was in past eras. And they got a whole lot of solidarity that they're going to be able to tap into when the resistance comes. If Trump thinks for 1 minute that he's going to be able to put together armed US troops and recruit them from Black communities to go into Palestine, he's got another thing coming. Because I credit Black people with having stopped the Iraq War. They saw how unjust that was. And the Army itself did a study to find out why they couldn't get recruits from Black communities. And they found out that the recruitment rates had plummeted in those communities. And when they inquired and found out why, it was because everybody who was influential in the Black community, preachers, teachers, counselors, coaches, were telling the kids, don't go. You will not fight the white man's unjust war. And there's no way that they're going to get recruits to fight this war, which is why they're so hell-bent on trying to develop drones and robot soldiers to do the fighting for them.
That's not going to work either.
Right. I'd love to build on that.
Yes, please.
Because, I completely agree. And when Trump was speaking last night, Trump is tapping into some interesting conservative traditions in this country and some interesting kind of political lineages. But one thing that I haven't associated him with is like a George W. Bush. But last night, that's what he sounded like. So, when on the eve of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, Bush and, Wolfowitz and Rumsfeld were saying, oh, our soldiers are going to be greeted with flowers and candy. We're going to invade these people and they're going to like it. That's what Trump was talking about, that this is somehow we're gonna clean out Gaza and fix it up, and it'll be a benefit that they'll appreciate. It was such a level of imperial arrogance, you know what I mean? And I completely agree, with my co-panelists that it's so far from the reality. I mean, these people are high on their own supply. You know what I mean? If they really believe that anybody is going to be thankful for the kind of imperial vision that Trump is putting forward, the reality is Palestinians are unbreakable. If Palestinians have endured what they have endured, not only for the past 75 plus years, for the past century, really, but for the past year and a half, and after all this, people have saved what they can from their homes as they've been displaced 1, 2, 5, 10 times so they can return home. After all that, they're unbroken. They're unbreakable. So it's not a question of if Palestine will be free. It's a question of when, because you're not going to crack this, And I really appreciate the analogies and the kind of putting that Palestinian reality in conversation, as my co-panelists have done, with the experience of Black folks in the Americas in this country, with the experience of people indigenous to the Americas. The thing what's that?
Absolutely. And I'm with you 100%. And I think one of the greatest misconceptions for the Palestinian struggle is that a lot of folks who just jumped onto the entire situation literally just over a year and a half ago, when in fact, we are talking about an over 75-year occupation. And a lot of folks do not know that Gaza was under a brutal occupation, many people calling it an open-air prison, which in fact is almost an insult to a lot of folks in Gaza, because it's not an open-air prison, because in prison you were receiving 3 meals a day, you do receive electric, you receive water, you receive shelter. So this is, again, part of the resiliency. But at the same time, what the Israeli government has done is that even through this unbelievable resistance, they are still always finding ways to infiltrate and find ways to penetrate. And I think all of us deep down inside knew all along that 1 month in after October 7th, that the Israelis already had a vision as to what they wanted to do. And now they're in this typical conundrum where they have realized that, number one, the Palestinians who live in Gaza have gone nowhere, and they do not want to go nowhere. And here's another fact, and it's not because I'm sitting here pledging any support to Hamas, but the number one reason why Israel lost this war, the number one reason, is that they still had to negotiate with Hamas. This wasn't a war where Israel triumphed and they were able to go directly and release the hostages, and, because they defeated their enemy. Oh no, they had to negotiate with Hamas. Hamas, in return, received hundreds of key people who are Palestinian released, back into West Bank, back into Gaza. So this is, to me, an unbelievable loss. Oh, and by the way, everyone, when the hostages were released, they had smiles on their face. One of them even had a Palestinian bracelet, and they're supposed to be big bad Hamas, but yet look at the difference between the Israelis that were released and the Palestinians, who many of them were malnourished, essentially on their deathbed because of starvation. So this is truly fascinating what we are witnessing. But again, resiliency is undefeated. Hence, the Palestinians always find a way to triumph.
That's right. The one thing I would add is just that now the movement in this country, I mean, all around the world, but especially here in this country, has been a breakthrough. I mean, people went hard for Palestine the past year and a half in ways that were historic, and frankly, I think that the Palestine movement in this country has been the most prepared for the Trump era, because we were already in these streets. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think what Trump is doing, it's catastrophic. It's overwhelming by design, and it's taking some time for a lot of folks to adjust. It will take time for our folks to adjust too, but I think that there was a level of preparation, for this moment, because people have already been feeling the repression. You know what I mean? And they have not been broken. So that is what's happening in the short term. Is there will be opposition in this country, and then in the long term, pay attention to what the most astute U.S. and Israeli officials are saying about what is shifting in the United States. Jack Lew, the outgoing U.S. ambassador to Israel, said this in an incredible interview in the Times of Israel. He said, "This next generation coming, it is not looking good for Israel." He said the people who are in college now, who are in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, these people are moving in. They will be making policy in the coming years, and this will not play out well for Israel. So in the near term, there will be protests. Obviously, there will be resistance and resilience of the Palestinians, but also there will be protests here. And in the long term, this thing is not sustainable.
Well, I will say this to you. On November 3rd, 1983, when Reverend Jesse Jackson announced his historic bid for the presidency, which was improbable, and Dr. James Zogby from the Arab American Institute, one of his deputy campaign managers, one of our first early supporters, when it was very unpopular to do so, and it was this lobby that we've been talking about who were they were the most vociferous opponents and physically threatening opponents of that campaign. He did say that as of this day, everything has changed. Then you did not say Palestinians. By 1988, you could say the P word. You can ask Dr. Zogby about it. You couldn't say that. But we ran 2 presidential campaigns pushing to get Palestinians mentioned, pushing to get South Africans discussed, pushing to get Mandela free, pushing. And that was that generation's fight more than 40 years ago. And it's been a continuous fight. And now here we are. And you know what? I'm with you, Mark Fancher. It is a glorious day. because everything has changed. Jonathan Greenblatt said it from the ADL on this phone call. He said, look, you all keep making this a right-left struggle. This is a generational shift. These kids have gone down the street on this. They do not want the progressive Jewish kids. The average American kid is like, this is just wrong. And this will not stand. This will not work. And they're saying that about all manners of injustice. And I thank God for that. I thank God for the opportunity, for trusting us all enough to live together in this time and space so that we can make some change. And my heart goes out to all of those people who are willing to live on top of rubble, because they will be home and they will be free. And there's that. Attorney Mark Fancher, Corey Peterson Smith, Rush Darwish. In a particular way, our love goes to you because your family is there, and we are with you.
Thank you. Well, that's what keeps hope alive for all of us, is that we know we have people like you that are on our side. It means a lot.
Now, you would keep hope alive, but we do keep hope alive. We do keep hope alive. You know what? Keeping hope alive, how brilliant that was, and how
That's all
brilliant
we got.
That's all we got, but that's all you need.
Mhm.
Keep hope alive. They cannot be defeated, and a people united cannot be defeated. And they're not just united. They're uniting people all over the world on justice, on love, more than anything else, because that is the first commandment. We have to learn to love one another. That's what we have to do. I love everybody. In the next hour, we're going to be talking about the Ahmaud Arbery case. You think it might be over. It is not. The prosecutor in the case told one of his murderers to go home and wash the blood off of you, and I'll take care of it. She was just exonerated. Let's talk about that and how that happened. On a technical flaw, the judge cleared her name. The Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Back in just a minute.